Next, we continue our conversations with Indianapolis women authors whose works are represented in the exhibit here at Central Library. In the Nina Mason Pulliam Indianapolis Special Collections Room, the exhibit is entitled Published, She Wrote. Today we meet Sister Mary Margaret Funk. Most people know her as Sister Meg. She has written numerous books. Since 1961, she has been a member of the Order of St. Benedict at Our Lady of Grace Monastery in Beech Grove. Among her titles, which focus on the Christian contemplative tradition, are Humility Matters, Thoughts Matter, Tools Matter, and Luxio Matters. And Sister Meg, it's a pleasure to have you on Between the Lines. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, John.
For those who aren't familiar with your books, what kind of theme do you try to present and impact you try to impart upon people?
I think an easy way to describe it was, I was the Catholic nun at the table of dialogue for the last 20 years, with Buddhist, Hindu, Confucianist, Sufis, and so I would have to speak to the Christian tradition about the inner life, about the contemplative life. And being a Benedictine nun, our rule goes back to 500. So I made a study of late antiquity, and that's where we find our parallel teachings with the Asian religions. So my first book was Thoughts Matter, and that's all about the 8 afflictive thoughts that burden us, and how thoughts become matter, and how they really don't matter, because we have to redirect them and take action for the good thoughts. But anyway, so Thoughts Matters the first. And so do you want to hear about the other books? Or?
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, after Thoughts, my students said, well, that's so grim, the thoughts, the 8 afflictive thoughts, which were food, sex, things, anger, dejection, acedia, vainglory, and pride. They said, what do we do about them? I said, well, there's antidotes written in the text of John Cash and Evagrius. These are all like year 300.
Okay.
We're way back there. And so I wrote Tools Matter, which was 26 practices that help you take care of your thoughts. Well, then the next book was even more surprising to me. I was sitting at this table of dialogue, I was in Tibet, I was in India, I was kind of all over representing the Catholic Church and the monastic tradition. And all these Buddhists, especially, and Hindus, they were, the yogas and the Rinpoches and the gurus and the, you name it, I was with them. And they were going to higher states of consciousness, just on and on and on. And I realized that from the scripture I knew, and Jesus that I know, our task is humility, not higher states of consciousness.
Okay.
So humility matters to us. We have one lifetime. We show up by loving others. We're redeemed because we're human. So anyway, that's where Humility Matters came from. And then the large prayer form that is our parallel to the largest forms in other traditions is Luxio Divina. And in the Rule of Benedict, we're supposed to do it 4 to 6 hours a day. And I checked around, nobody seemed to be doing it, number one. Number two, nobody seemed to know what it was. There's many methods, but so that was a fun one to write. Okay. And I'm actually writing the 5th in the series now, and it's called Discernment Matters. So.
Now, a book that may be pertaining to a lot of what's going on in the world today that you've written, Islam Matters,
yes.
Or Islam Is.
Islam Is.
Islam Is. How important is that book today, and what do you try to accomplish in bridging the understanding between Christianity and Islam?
Well, when we invaded Iraq, I realized that I got called into the table of dialogue with Islam because we were skilled in dialogue, and the bishops had this very important meeting out here at Plainfield, the Islamic Society of North America. So I was on that dialogue for 10 years, and I thought I was somewhat embarrassed by my colleagues that know so little about Islam. They may have been able to speak Arabic or know the Quran, but they didn't have a sociological feel for the religion in and of itself. So my first degree is Phenomenology of Religions at Catholic University. So I wrote a catechetical book, for Catholics, really, Christians, about Islam. But I got such hate mail, oh my goodness. People don't like it. They don't like to think that Allah and God the Father is the same. So, as long as it's not the same God, we're not real brothers and sisters. So, wow. You know,
So this book attempts to rectify that
It does.
understanding.
It does. It just talks about, you know, it's the same Father. And also, the Muslims in practice are more like me as a nun. They pray 5 times a day, you know, they really sacrifice like Ramadan and their money. So they're very devout, very devout. And so it's an appreciative view. And the poor Muslims themselves have had so much trouble keeping an image that is not so contaminated by the radical Muslims. Now we've got radical Christians too. And the Old Testament has twice as much violence language as the Quran. So it's really funny for me to hear the Quran is so bad.
Wow.
They haven't read the Hebrew where it says snuff out every living breath and not even leave a plant when we conquer a land. So we have a lot to learn.
Well, we could go on and delve into these matters much more deeply than what we have time for, but suffice to say, you have at least 6 or 7 books that are part of the collection, published, she wrote. What does it mean for you to have your works represented here at Central Library and in such a nice collection here in the Special Collections Room?
Well, I'm just thrilled, actually. My mother was from Indianapolis, and I came to boarding school here and then entered. And so I really do feel like Indianapolis has as much as any other city that I know of, you know, maybe smaller scale. So I'm glad to contribute to it myself as a writer and to bring our tradition too. I mean, I think it's rich, all the ways of wisdom. So I'm very, very pleased, John.
Good.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for being part of this, and thank you for joining us today. And again, you can check Sister Mary Margaret Funk's works from the library's website and our collection, imcpl.org, or please visit the Nina Mason Pulliam Indianapolis Special Collections Room here on the 6th floor of Central Library, where you'll see the sisters' works and those of many, many other women writers of Indianapolis through the end of the year.